The new tower game mode is just released and brought with it insane rewards that are extremely important to raising your characters, such as up to 10 prism orbs. I've been live streaming myself playing through the tower, and I've noticed that some people are struggling a little with the final stages of the tower, which are indeed quite difficult. So I thought that I would give you a bit of a hint and a bit of a guide on how you too can beat the tower. To talk about the structure of the tower, there's always going to be 4 stages where you fight against witch minions that then culminate in a 5th stage where you fight against a boss. Afterwards, you will then have another 4 stages of fighting against another witch's minion, after which you will then fight that witch as well. If we were to lay it out, the first 5 stages are going to be the Rose Garden Witch, then 6 through 10 is the Box Witch, 11 through 15 is the Darkness Witch, and 16 through 20 is the Shadow Witch. All of the ones I've just mentioned are all going to be fought on what is basically standard difficulty, or even a little bit diving into battler difficulty. Afterwards, however, we're starting with stage 21, we're now going to be in Nightmare difficulty, where you will now have to fight from stages 21 to 25 the Graffiti Witch on Nightmare difficulty, and afterwards the final stages from 26 to 30 you will have to fight the Mermaid Witch on Nightmare difficulty. If you have already fought these bosses before, especially on Nightmare, then nothing in Tower should be any new to you, as these are basically almost one-to-one exactly the same battles as you've already fought them in the regular stages. Because of this, I will be skipping straight to stage 21 with the guide, because if you are somewhere between 1 and 20, that means you're still in the part of the game where you're still progressing through the standard story, through the battle story, and even through the early stages of Nightmare story, and it is much more reasonable for you to improve your account by playing those stages and continuing with the progression through those game modes to raise your player ranks, to get more resources, to get a magic level on your characters, and raise your characters that way, and then you can go and tackle the tower. Once you've made it through the first 20 stages though and are starting with the stage 21, you will now be fighting against the Graffiti Witch minions on Nightmare, and there are 4 different types of minions that you'll have to watch out for. Starting out with the Red Flame minion, this one simply gains bonus actions when it's alone, but it doesn't actually do that much by itself, simply trying to remove some buffs and applying some burns. More dangerous though is the Purple Flame minion, which has 2 actions and keeps trying to buff all allies. So whenever you see this minion, try to kill it immediately, so that it cannot buff all its allies that much. Another minion you'll face is the Boat minion, which has 2 actions every 2 turns, and it enrages whenever it gets below 50% HP. However, usually you're going to damage a minion by breaking it first, and when the minion is broken, of course it can't take any actions, so usually this thing should never actually get a turn while it is under 50% HP. Otherwise it simply only does a little bit of damage and tries to weaken you, but overall not that big of a threat. And last but not least, there's the Car minion, which simply tries to ramp up buffs on itself, so you might want to probably take this one out first, unless there's a Purple Flame minion, in which case you should take that one out first, but otherwise the Car minion has to go so that these buffs don't stack too high. As far as the Graffiti Witch itself is concerned, it will have 2 actions and has greatly increased debuff resistance. It doesn't say this specifically, but it also seems to have really high resistance to most ailments as well, so you will not be able to rely on both your debuffs or your ailments. Ailments are of course effects like damage over time effects, burn, poison, curse, wound, but also effects like stun that do various different things to the enemy, while debuffs are simply stat down effects like damage down, or defense down, or attack down, or speed down. Additionally, buffs might also not be very effective, since the boss will repeatedly try to remove buffs from your team. It will also attempt to stun you at the same time, and it might also give itself a buff to its own attack and defense that ramps up over time, but can be removed with buff removal, so you can take something like a 4-star Ayame or a 3-star Hazuki to help out removing those buffs, so that the boss doesn't get too difficult. Otherwise, the boss doesn't seem to do that much, and doesn't actually have that much speed either, so if you're simply able to sustain the boss's attacks and have someone like an Ayame or a 3-star Hazuki to remove the enemy's buffs, the boss can't actually do that much to you, and will most likely go down very easily. Afterwards, with stage 26, we're now in the actual final stretch of the tower, and this is where it gets really difficult. There are 4 different types of minions that you'll have to watch out for. The first one is the Blue Conductor. This one tries to buff all of its allies and also gives everyone damage reduction while it is alive, so whenever there's a Blue Conductor on the field, you need to burst it down immediately. There's also a Green Conductor, which you can safely ignore, since this one simply tries to heal all allies, and these heals simply won't actually do that much. What will be the most dangerous part of these fights, however, will be the Violin and the base players, specifically when both of them are on the field at the same time. This is because one of them applies a debuff and deals more damage to targets that have ailments on them, while the other one applies an ailment and deals more damage to targets that have debuffs on them. Specifically, stage 29 will be very dangerous because of this, where you will have both a blue conductor and a violin and a bass player on the field at the same time. On this stage specifically, I would urge you to try and break all 3 targets as fast as possible using AoE breakers like Ashley for example, or like Mito, or of course your Pluvia Madoka if you have one. Lux Madoka of course will also do well. And then once you're starting to break the enemies, you will try to burst down the blue conductor as fast as possible, so that the blue conductor can't get out of break and keep buffing the allies. After which, focus on one of the two and not at both at the same time, as this might lead to them both getting out of break and then start killing you. The very beginning of this fight can be very dangerous, so if you feel like you're not able to protect the group fast enough, you might want to use like a 4-star Hasuki to give more action advances to your tank or your defender so that they can shield the group more often, or action advances to your healer so that they can heal the group more often in between your enemy attacks. And then we get to the most dangerous fight at all, the Nightmare Mermaid Witch, which is actually the exact same Nightmare Mermaid Witch from the Nightmare battles, however with one difference: this one is also weak to Void, while the one in the Nightmare battles actually is not weak to Void. Aside from that, if you've beaten the Nightmare Mermaid Witch already, this one is going to be the same fight, so you can use the exact same strategy you used, and it should be not too difficult. Speaking about strategy though, the boss gains 2 actions and will on each turn gain a stacking attack and defense buff, which cannot be removed in any way since it's a passive ability and those cannot be removed. And at the same time, whenever the boss takes a turn and does not have an ailment on them, they will also gain a stacking speed buff, which can get out of hand very quickly. Because of this, it can be very beneficial to use a character like, for example, a Himika, who can apply a burn to an enemy, but also if you have a Ren will be absolutely insane here and should be used in any team if you have her. If you find that your debuffers are not fast enough to debuff the boss on turn 1, you can also use someone like a 4-star Hasuki to immediately give an action advance to your debuffer and have them immediately burn or wound the target. Theoretically, you could also use a 4-star Hana for this, since she also has a damage over time ailment, being the curse. However, otherwise, Hana doesn't actually do that much outside of the curse, so the 4-star Himika or 5-star Ren are preferred. If you are able to keep an ailment on the boss will be dramatically weaker and should not be that much more difficult. However, there's still some things to keep out for. The first one being that the boss will regenerate some HP on some turns, but also give itself some restorement to its break gauge on every single turn. Damage will also try to remove your buffs or delay your actions in order to stay alive for longer, while of course stacking the attack and defense buffs up at the same time. Because of this, even with ailments allowing the boss not to get too fast, you still have to actually make sure that you're able to deal enough break damage in a given time before the boss overwhelms you or stacks buffs too high. Because of this, you might probably want to run a really strong single target breaker like an Iroha or Arena, or multiple breakers if you don't have those. You might also want to consider having speed buffs like a 4-star Rika, for example, who can provide speed buffs to the team and also provide some SP that you can put on your single target breaker or your AoE breaker if you don't have a single target one, to make sure that you can break the boss as quickly as possible. Other than that, of course, bring a sustain like a Kaede or a Kokoro or a Kirika, Sana, anyone that can heal and keep the team alive or give a barrier. Once the boss is broken, the boss will be stunned for a really long time, while also having an up to 800% damage bonus from breaking, so you can now take your time to actually damage the boss down. If you don't manage to kill the boss, you can simply go for a second break, or you can swap some team members around to do more damage. Now, how exactly you're going to kill the boss either in 1 or 2 breaks might depend on the characters that you have, so if you have everything that I just mentioned, you will now have to worry about how to actually move some characters around, move portraits around, move some support Kyoko around, so that you're actually able to deliver the damage necessary to kill this boss, either in 1 break or to be able to sustain it long enough to be able to do 2 breaks. This will come down to your characters and you will have to figure that out for yourself, sadly. However, if you're really stuck, you can of course go to the Discord, and there you can ask people in the Exedra help channel, for example, or the Exedra discussion channel, and ask them what sort of team you could make to help out with your battles. Well, this will be that. I hope you very much that you are able to beat the tower. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time.